Night Owls of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing that happened to you when everyone else was sleeping? When I was about 12 to 13 I was laying in bed reading one night when I looked up and saw what looked like a man's head and neck lean into my room from near the ceiling on the outside wall. I say it looked like a man because it looked like really bad 90s CGI. The skin was smooth, plastic looking, and too orange. His eyes were hollow, making it look mask-like, but there was a deep red light that you could see through the eye holes. It very mechanically panned at a slow even rate from left to right and then back to center before leaning back out through the wall. Needless to say, I had a really hard time getting to sleep that night. I probably only slept for a couple hours before I heard my parents stirring around in the kitchen. The phone was also ringing way too much for how early in the morning it was, so I left my room and asked what was going on. Apparently, my uncle had gone missing the previous night after coming out to hunt on our land. His body was found hanging over a barbed wire fence at the back of our property later that morning. In retrospect, the weird face did eerily resemble his. I've never spoken to my family about it. I was in a call with my girlfriend one night a month or so ago and had fallen asleep. The next morning she tells me she heard someone walking around on my side of the call, a door closing, and someone talking to me. Apparently she tried waking me up, even yelling for me to try to get me up, but I was fast asleep. I asked my family the next morning and none of them were awake or in my room at any point that night, so I'm still not sure what she heard. I was pulling an all-nighter when I was in high school because I had an essay that I didn't start until the last minute. I was home alone that week because everyone was out of town. I was in my room typing on my computer and listening to music at full blast when out of nowhere I heard my name coming from the kitchen. Now, my room was next to the kitchen, so I definitely knew it came from there. It was also loud enough to be able to hear it over the speakers. So I walk to the kitchen and as soon as I do this a cooking pan falls off the kitchen sink. Angel, it made jump and I immediately turned on the lights. Obviously there was no one there, and it could have been my imagination and a coincidence that the pan fell. But I turned on all the lights in the house just in case. My room used to be the basement. I lived in a too-small house with my separated parents, brother, aunt, uncle, grandma, and cousin. The basement had concrete walls and one high off-ground small window, so I put my bed as close to the stairs as possible and bought a space heater. But anyways, I still had trouble sleeping there, so I'd lay awake at night. One night I heard a weird sound. I heard a sort of squish noise and a deep groan down in the basement with me, so I turned on my lamp that didn't quite light the entire room. I got up and was shaking with fear and was like, hello, no response, but no way was I gonna sleep down there, so I grabbed my pillow and booked it out of there. But as I was going up the stairs the sound came again, but extremely loud. It woke my brother in the living room. I've never felt more fear than I did right then. It's hard to describe the sounds. It was like a deep yell/groan. When I went to visit my boyfriend at the time in Long Island, New York for the first time, I stayed at his house. Because his parents were old school, they didn't let us sleep in the same bedroom, so they accommodated me in the den. Mind you, the den is below the house and is just a few steps above the basement. I woke up facing the wall and felt the other side of the bed sink as if someone had sat down on the bed, and the room was suddenly really cold. I got the hell out of there and made him switch me rooms. Something was off. Found out later his grandma had died a few months prior. She lived, slept, and died in that same den. A few years ago I was on a camping trip with some friends. It was my first time camping in an RV. I have to say, it doesn't really feel like camping, more like a really comfy extended road trip, but I was glad we had the RV that night. I was up late browsing through Reddit as you do when through my open window I heard someone open one of the compartments on the outside of the RV. Thinking it was my friend Josh who was bunked over by the outside door, I whispered asking if he wanted to have a beer and go down to the creek. Instead of responding, I heard the gravel crunch as he walked around and jiggled the door handle. Thinking he locked himself out, I crawled down from my bunk and put my foot down right into Josh's stomach. He was pissed, yelling at me for not watching where I was going and upset that he was woken up like that. Plus, I kinda think I was dangerously close to stepping on his balls, but neither of us felt the need to broach that subject. I asked him who went outside and he angrily told me to go back to bed, that nobody was outside. So I did, not wanting to continue that unpleasant conversation. Early the next morning as the sun was barely peeking, there was a loud series of knocks on the door. It was a cop asking if we had seen anyone suspicious the previous night. Apparently some campers near us had been assaulted by some crazy guy who fled into the night. Using the timestamps from my Reddit posts, I was able to give him a reasonably close approximation of the time it had been when I heard the noises out the window. He told us that the campgrounds would be closed the rest of the day and we had to relocate. On our way out, we had to drive past where the crime scene must have been and it was eerie thinking how easily that might have been us. On multiple occasions I swear something has tapped on my window. I'm on the second story. I've also had a few very vivid hallucinations about shadowy men standing at my door just staring at me. Not too long ago, my PC and my PS4 turned on at exactly the same time, and there was no one but me in the room, so I just unplugged them both and went on Reddit for an hour. A couple years back, I was staying at my grandparents' house for some reasons. They live in the middle of nowhere, Australia. I was almost asleep when I hear the screeching noise from outside. It sounded far away and way too mechanical to be an animal. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, when I start seeing these flickering purple and red lights out the window in the corner of my eye. Whenever I properly looked, I didn't see the light, but when I looked away, it was there. I thought that it was lighting, or something, but was rather spooked at this point so I was Googled everything. I eventually get out of bed to investigate, and go into the kitchen where I would be able to see outside better. I sat in the kitchen from probably 20 minutes not seeing anything. I went back to bed and tried to ignore it. In the morning I found out what had happened. In the area it's not uncommon for people to steal cars, go for a joyride and then crash it in an abandoned cane field, and set it on fire. The purple lights were the headlights and the red was the fire. This probably doesn't fit the description of creepy. I don't know. Prefacing this, I am a chronic insomniac prone to bouts of extreme late-night walks. I live in the suburbs of Tokyo. Anyway, I'm off on my rounds, maybe it's about 2 a.m. I heard cats screaming, absolutely in terror. I still can't get over the racket they were making. I searched high and low and couldn't find the source of the noise. Eventually, buried under some thickets on a piece of scrubland I found a cardboard box, taped up with no air holes or vents. It seemed very deliberately done, callous. I scraped off the tape to find two very small kittens inside. Well, don't worry, I told them. I'll take you home with me. Texted my very sleepy wife and explained what happened. She got a spot prepared for them. Food, water, etc. I took them to the vet the next day and he gave them the once-over, gave them the shots, etc. I asked him if I could put an ad in his window hoping someone would adopt them. Luckily someone did. My husband volunteers for the RFS, Rural Fire Service, volunteer firefighter in Australia, and one afternoon I had washed all his gear and hung it out on the clothesline. Went to let the dogs out for a wee about 1 a.m. and the dogs started barking really aggressively at something in the backyard. I turned the backlight on to see what looked like an 8 feet man standing dead still staring at me in the backyard. Turned out the backlight caught the reflective parts on his uniform that lit them up to expose what looked like a giant man. I was home alone with the kids at the time and was so terrified, even after I realized, and hardly slept a wink. When my son was a newborn, my husband worked late shifts which left me home alone. I didn't like to stay on my own at night, so I tended to stay up late in the living room watching TV until he came home after midnight. We lived in a quiet community and were the youngest residents by about 40 years. One night around 9, someone starts feverishly pounding on my back windows. They were hitting them so hard that my walls were shaking. I jumped up, and it quit. I had no idea how to explain it. My husband came home and I had him check the back of the house, but there was nothing there. Oddly enough, my son slept through all of this. A few nights later it happened again. Only this time, it didn't stop when I stood up. It kept going, harder and louder, for nearly 30 seconds. I started yelling, thinking someone was messing with me, and it quit. I called my father-in-law who lived close by, and asked if he was trying to scare me. He's known as a prankster, and he told me he'd never do something that scary, or do anything to wake up my son that late at night. He asked if he needed to come down, but I didn't want him to think I was some scared city girl afraid to be on her own, so I said no. My own dad came by the next day and set up a punji stick trap in the backyard, underneath the windows. My husband sat the shotgun out for me. The next time it happened was the worst. It was around 10 p.m. when the banging began, and I'd had enough. I faced the windows and screamed, "I have a gun." There was a short pause. Then the banging began with an intensity it had never had before. It was like someone was trying to knock down the wall. I grabbed the gun and slung open the door, not a great idea in hindsight, and shouted, "Fucking try me." The banging stopped. It never happened again. My husband and I checked the area under the windows out back. None of the traps had been activated. We had several other odd happenings at that house, but nothing ever scared me as badly as that. English is not my main language. I will try my best to translate. I was in the basement playing games and it was a bit dark. Anyways, I feel like there was someone behind me, so I turned back and I just looked at the floor and I saw a feet. It was female feet and I thought it was my sister. I keep on playing 'cause I thought my sister went to the dryer to take out the clothes she forgot overnight. 5 minutes later it was very silent, like no one in the basement except me. I called her name but no one answered, so I went to the washing machine/dryer and no one was there. I was scared that I went running upstairs. There is no way it was my imagination. I told the story to my siblings and they told me their experiences too. When I was younger, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. I was in 2nd grade, so I usually kept the door open to get light in because I was scared of the dark. My brother would always close the door and refuse to open it because he was bigger and older. I couldn't do anything about it. Well, one night I woke up to a pitch black bedroom. As my eyes started to adjust, I glanced over to my brother's bed across the room and noticed that he wasn't in it. As I looked across the room, there he was. He was standing right in front of the closed door, just standing still. Since it was really dark, all I could see was his black figure, a silhouette of a little boy. I didn't move a muscle. My brother stood in his position motionless for 10 minutes until I dozed off into sleep. To this day, the thought of what he was doing and the look of his motionless dark figure still keeps me up at night. Almost killed myself trying astral projection at night once. Told this story on another thread but it was buried. When I was in high school I found a book from the 70s on astral projection / lucid dreaming my mom had from her hippie days. Spent a couple nights reading it and was all excited to try it. The next night I go to sleep and I did it. I'm in a dream, and I'm standing on my bedroom floor next to my bed, and I'm totally aware it's a dream. I'm kinda just standing there in my room looking at my bookshelf trying to decide where to go and was pretty set on Ireland, when everything goes dark. All I feel is my head rocking back. Pressure on my eye. Then it happens again. And again and again and again. When I open my eyes I'm back in bed and gasping for breath. I was lightheaded. And then I have to reach up and grab Abby, our rescued declawed cat, because she's on my chest with her poor mutilated paws pressed together and she's diving at my eye. That cat put her paws together and was jabbing me in the eye to wake me up, using all her tiny cat force to do it over and over again. I never tried it again after that because I think too much of me left my body, and it was just dying while I was dicking around with my soul out of my body. That little cat saved my life, I think. Also she was this tiny black cat. If she weighed 5 pounds I'd be surprised, so I wasn't out of breath because she was on my chest. Alright, I have a bunch of thing for this, so I'll write out a few stories. I'll sprinkle in some DRS. This one INST really at super late night, but I was at a friend's house for a birthday party and we watched rake sighting videos, the North American stalker creature, until 10 p.m. when we had to go home. After a long day terrifying each other, we were getting to my neighborhood when my friend points at a house and says, "I bet the rake lives in there," and as he points, the lights came on. As a bunch of 12-year-olds at the time, we freaked so hard. TLDR, lucky coincidence. The next few are more paranormal in nature, the last will not be. Another sleepover this time. The time is about 11 p.m. and my group of 6-ish guys were at one of our houses. This was yet another birthday. His house has a walkout basement that had windows facing a quiet road into the neighborhood. Suddenly, car lights appeared facing the window, and by lights, I mean brights, and the car never moved, never started, and we never heard it drive into place. We did have the window open and haven't seen the car until the lights appeared. The car was a simple red sedan. Car shined its brights into the window until almost 1 a.m. in the morning, when without warning they shut off. After all our conspiracies about the car, we went to see where it was now. The car had vanished with its light, the same way it appeared. No noise, no movement, not even headlights down the road it would have went to avoid detection from the window, and we could see a long way down that road as it was out of the trees and flat. TLDR, random car appears on road, shines brights into window for hours, then disappears.